Producing over 500 hours per week of talk radio, GCN Live is a world leader in talk radio. Archives for the following program can be found at GCN Live.
Live from the palatial studios at Emerson College in beautiful downtown Boston, this is the Jeff Santos Show on the Revolution Radio Network. Rebuilding America, together, investing, activism, and supporting the middle class. Now, here's Jeff.
Back on the Revolution Radio Network, it is the Jeff Santos Show, 844-3-SANTOS, the phone number to join us. Our next guest is, of course, our friend from the great West Coast, from the Pacific Northwest, from Seattle, Washington. He is a great journalist, independent journalist. You see him everywhere. Of course, you can follow him on Twitter, and you can hear him right here on the Jeff Santos Show every Tuesday in the 3:30 Eastern Time hour, 12:30 Pacific. Our good friend, Mr. Mark Taylor-Canfield, joins us. A little David Bowie for you. Fame. The song, of course, like a lot of people, good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield is a big fan of David Bowie's music, and he meant a lot to you, did he, Mark?
One of the major influences in my music, for sure, and not just myself, but there's a Seattle Times article today which is reprinting some of the social networking posts from Eddie Vedder from Soundgarden, Krist Novoselic from Nirvana, saying that, yes, he had a great influence on the sound of Seattle, the musical scene here. He always has had. Did have actually some connections in Seattle and did spend some time here. So there is a David Bowie connection in Seattle, and the entire music community, yes, is sort of in shock, and also at the same time celebrating the memory of all the great art and music that he contributed to the culture. Just an amazing artist, amazing individualist who really set the standard in terms of, going out there and taking a risk and being as creative as possible in the music industry. So he opened the door for a lot of other artists to express their creativity in a way that they probably weren't, allowed to before. So thank you, David, and we're all greatly moved by what's happened in the last few days. It definitely choked me up when my girlfriend, delivered the news. I just, had a hard time there for a while, but I'm trying to celebrate the fact that his music is out there and has influenced so many people and has had such a great effect on the pop music world, not just in the United States, but, or internationally. He's just an amazing, amazing person, great songwriter, great performer, amazing artist on many different levels. And there's been a major museum exhibit that was dedicated to him that a documentary was made out of just in the last few years. So they had screened that at the Seattle International Film Festival here in Seattle, and it was a very interesting film. So, yes, thank you for playing that song, Jeff. That was my request, and I love that song. I think it's one of his best. So thanks so much for playing that. I appreciate it.
Well, no, it meant a lot to us, too. It was tragic news yesterday, and we had a chance to talk to our good friend Steve Rosenthal, the Magic Shop, which recorded his last two albums, including one that was just released a few days back. And, it hurt him, and it's hurt a lot of people today. Our good friend John Nichols, who I know you like, wrote about it in The Nation yesterday and the effect it had for him. So this is truly a loss for so many, and for people like yourself in particular who have, worked as musicians as well. So hopefully this will, like everything else, we will remember him and the works that he has contributed in this latest album, which a lot of people haven't got a hold of yet, will serve as something that goes on, much like what happened with John Lennon when he was tragically taken at a young age as well. But to get back to what I think needs to be done here, and I don't know if there's any easy transition, but the fact is that there are a lot of great artists that need to be shown. And one of the ways to do that is to invest in a place like Seattle, which obviously has a great music scene historically and now even more so. And I think that, whether we're talking again about Bernie Sanders leading the political revolution, I think more of those 2 million people that have given on the average $35 to me is an example that it's a revolution that needs to go, and it's just not about what's going on in Washington D.C., but what's happening in Washington State and in every state in this country is so important, and it has to be at the city council level or the county executive or the mayoral levels, because we've seen what happens with local government where they don't have the funds or they have people who don't consider certain issues to be that important. So this quote-unquote political revolution, to me, which I think is real and important, has to be able to go down into the towns and cities across this country. And I would guess you would agree.
Even Walter Cronkite even wrote about this in his autobiography, which is one of my favorite books, talking about the Reagan Revolution and how he considered the Reagan administration to be extremely right-wing in a lot of ways. One of the things that Mayor Murray was talking about was the lack of funding for mental health care as being a major contributor to the homelessness in Seattle. There are a lot of folks out there who are mentally ill, either on medication or not medication, but needing help and are just not getting it. Ever since the Reagan years, the funding for in-house psychiatric care was cut to the bone. So a lot of people have been living on the streets ever since, and that's created a whole generation of homelessness. And in terms of Bernie Sanders and his polling of 50% in New Hampshire, as I said to you in a text earlier, I'm sure there's some political consultants that are a little bit shocked by that at this point.
Yes, indeed.
Especially considering the fact that Hillary Clinton has raised, about twice as much money, has already spent.
And from corporate interests like Citibank and everything else, yep.
Yes, she's already spent 3 times as much as Bernie Sanders, and he's still polling at 50% in New Hampshire, so that should tell people something.
And he's ahead in Iowa, according to Monmouth polls as well. Quinnipiac, yes. I'm sorry.
And there is an issue here. If you go to opensecrets.org, and we've been covering this at Democracy Watch News and other places that I report for, the contributors for Hillary Clinton, the top contributors for the Hillary Clinton campaign and the top contributors for the Bernie Sanders campaign, there's quite an interesting comparison there, because what you have are some pretty heavy Wall Street financier groups like J.P. Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley, being the top contributors for the Hillary Clinton campaign. And if you look at the Bernie Sanders campaign, the top 5 contributors are basically labor organizations or labor unions, including the Nurses Union, the SEIU,
right.
Communications.
Yeah, no, there's a number of them. It's going to be interesting. I think we are seeing the beginning of a change in this country, and hopefully it will continue. Well, let me ask you this, just as an aside. If you were to get just a little bit of snow, does that basically put everything, on hold? Do people stop when the sleet comes?
When snow hits Seattle, the city shuts down. The schools close, the businesses close. No one has snow tires because it's such a rare phenomenon here. And the city is a city of hills, much like Rome or San Francisco, where, to get anywhere, even with 4-wheel drive at that point. And part of the issue there is that normally when it snows in Seattle, it thaws at some point during the day, goes above freezing, so everything, all of the snow turns into water. And then, of course, as soon as the sun goes down, it freezes again, so you get 2 inches of ice. And that's why our mayor a few years ago shut down, some of the major cities for about 5 days. So Denny Hill in Seattle became a snow sledding course, and people were grabbing anything they could, cardboard boxes, garbage can pails, whatever, and just having a great time. It's actually a good time in Seattle. When it snows, people don't have to go to work, so it sort of becomes a party. I remember that in college.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. Well, speaking of shutting down, and like a lot of local officials, although not progressives, have basically taken the meat cleaver to budgets for homeless and so forth. And with what we talked about last week, with the rent being so damn high, now it is creating a lot of problems. What's the latest there on the homelessness issue in Seattle?
Well, Seattle and Martin Luther King Jr. County did declare a civil emergency in November because of this issue of 10,300 people without permanent housing in Martin Luther King Jr. County. So what we have is a situation where numerous tent cities have popped up all over the city. The first one being named Nicholsville, after our former mayor, Greg Nichols, who was accused of largely being in the pockets of the big developers, which is one reason why he lost his re-election campaign. But our new mayor, Ed Murray, has brought up this issue of economic inequality from the very beginning of his term. It was the main theme of his State of the Union address last year in February. And so he has dipped into the emergency funds in the city. In the city, there's an extra $5 million that they've come up with to deal with this issue. But, Jeff, even with that amount of money, it's pretty clear that they're not going to be able to house everybody that needs permanent residence in the Seattle area. So more needs to be done, and the county commissioners, the Seattle City Council, Shama Sawant, our Democratic Socialist city council member, has been out in front on this issue, just like she was the $15 an hour minimum wage. But as I said last time, even with the $15 an hour minimum wage being phased in, it's not going to keep up with rents when, people are paying $4,000 a month for an apartment downtown. So it's a major issue. It's not going to go away even with this emergency that's been declared, but it has allowed the county and the city to dip into some reserves to try to help at least some of those people who currently don't have housing. And one of the national statistics, that's been really shocking lately is this statistic that over the last 6 years, the homeless child population, the number of children who are homeless, has increased by 60%. So this is not just an issue in Seattle. It's an issue around the country. We've seen these problems in San Francisco as well, but Seattle is now probably the city in the country right now that is dealing with the biggest crisis in terms of homelessness at this point. It's really a sad situation, and even though we have been very successful in terms of attracting corporate businesses to the city, it's resulted in a higher cost of living, higher rents, skyrocketing real estate prices, and the result is, naturally, during a business cycle like that the working class folks who have lived here, for their entire lives suddenly find that they can't afford to live in the city that they grew up and raised their children in. So that's what we're facing right now in Seattle.
Sad state of affairs. Talking with our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield here on the Jeff Santos Show. Let me dig into this. So you have, on one hand, not enough money from the state, at least not gathered, to help teachers and to help students. There's a shortfall there. The state courts have sued and therefore asking more elements to be put there. You have the city without a lot of money, and of course you have the feds, victimized by the Republicans not wanting to spend any money on anything. So you have a scenario, unless there's some magic rain dust coming down with dollars attached, there's no money anywhere. Or is there? It's just being hit once again by this rule in the state legislature that you need 3/4 of the legislature to vote a certain way, or whatever that number that is.
It's actually 2/3, Jeff. The same thing has happened in Oregon. So you have the Republicans in both state legislatures who have just enough of a majority in one house and such a thin majority for the Democrats in the other that, yes, it's allowed them to block a lot of education funding. One of the things that Mayor Murray cited, one of the reasons that he cited for this homelessness problem in Seattle, was also the cut in the federal budget for housing subsidies. So it's something that he laid some blame at the doorstep of our Congress, in terms of not adequately funding HUD and other programs that have traditionally created affordable housing for people. In the Seattle area, in order to qualify for a HUD grant under the Seattle Housing Authority, there's, something like a 5-year waiting list. So there's just not enough affordable housing. There's not enough federal money for it. There's not enough state money for it. And what's surprising, Jeff, is that even though obviously the tax base is increasing quite substantially in the Seattle area, that money is just not being funneled into taking care of people without shelter, and it's also hasn't been enough to take care of the public education needs. So you have teachers having crowdsourced funding in order to provide materials for their classroom. I talked about a private individual here who donated $70,000 to a West Seattle school district in order to keep a teacher because the district couldn't afford to keep that teacher on. And by the way, it wasn't even the school where his children attend. It was just his effort to create publicity and also help out a teacher, but to kind of bring to light this issue in the state of Washington, where you have a lot of very educated people. It's one of the most educated populations in the country per capita. But at this point, how are kids going to get to these great colleges if they can't even afford to provide funding for their high schools? We have one of the largest class sizes in the country. So a lot of the teachers here have been fighting that issue. The Washington Education Association has sponsored rolling strikes over the last year, which our own state attorney general said was illegal. But, the teachers were trying to make a statement there that if you can't provide funding for education, then you can't expect the teachers to adequately, educate our children. So even with all this money, even with all this money coming in, I'm just not seeing much of it going for health programs, housing programs, and education. So maybe just a problem with the priority of our budgeting and our value system.
Right. Well, here's the thing, and I want to break this at national if you can, and we'll take it over the break too. Is this issue? And I've talked about it. Is that we have seen Democrats screw things up here, whether they're in power or they're in the minority. They haven't been able to help the people that need the help the most. And that's what they're there for, the public servants. And I really believe that, if Bernie Sanders is going to be the nominee, this, I think, will help everybody right down to the county executive level, right down to the mayor's level, because you need to be able to have progressives at all levels, and this is what's seemingly the problem. Not enough of them. It's the Jeff Santos Show. Mark Taylor-Canfield is our guest. We're back after this timeout. All the best, my friend. We'll talk to you next Tuesday.
Okay, Jeff. Thanks a lot. And thanks to you, David Bowie, for inspiring so much great music around the world. So we'll see you next week.
See you next week, my friend. We're right back. New York's on deck. It's the Jeff Santos Show.
Connect on Facebook.
Jeff Santos Show.
23 minutes past the hour. It is the Jeff Santos Show. Our next guest comes to us from the Granite State of New Hampshire. He is a producer, reporter for New Hampshire One. He's been covering all of the politics in New Hampshire on both sides of the aisle. And we go to him because we want to talk New Hampshire politics. We talk to Paul Steinhausen of New Hampshire One. How you doing, Paul?
I am doing well, Jeff. I'm doing well. I was just back from a Ted Cruz rally. But the other big news on the Democratic side, hey, we got a new poll out up here in New Hampshire that, it indicates Bernie Sanders up 14 points. It's a Monmouth University survey conducted just in the last couple of days, January 7th through 10th. Passing at 53%. Hillary Clinton at 39%. Mark O'Malley's starting to edge up a little bit. He's at 5%, still way back. But that's the big shocker here. Because, it's been pretty close up here in the most recent polls. But this one, is it an outlier or is it trending? I don't know. I guess we'll find out when we see more surveys.
Well, one thing that fascinates me is that, and I thought that the number in New Hampshire when they showed him this ahead by 2 or 3 was a little bit lower. And on the other side, I didn't know if he was actually as close as he was in Iowa. But the one thing that I think is consistent is that the pollsters, we're going to try to have on our good friend David Paleologos on tomorrow, but the fact is that how much are they looking at 20-somethings, and can they get enough of them? I know they account for some of them in their metrics, but, a lot of them don't have landlines, and if you're calling a lot of landlines, and depending upon that, then it's going to skew, and if maybe this Monmouth poll does that, maybe a little bit too much, but the fact is that maybe that's what we really are at, is that a significant lead. Maybe it's not 14 points. But are you seeing the differences? The numbers are showing 60-30 if you're under 45 for Sanders, and then the opposite way for Clinton.
Yeah,
what you're seeing on the ground?
When you go to their rallies, and I go to a lot of both of their rallies, and the Clinton crowd is definitely an older crowd than the Bernie Sanders crowd here in New Hampshire. Yeah, there are exceptions to that, of course, just like there always are. But, yeah, that's a fair thing to say that overall, the Clinton crowds are definitely a little bit older. You make a good point on whether they're using cell phones or not. Most pollsters nowadays, I don't know, anywhere between 20, 30, 40% of the calls they make go out to cell phones. In the old days it was all landlines, but Americans, don't use landlines that much anymore. Landlines now tend to skew older as well because most Americans under 40 don't have landlines anymore.
Right.
Yeah, if you take all these polls, that Monmouth poll that came out today that had Bernie Sanders up by 14, it was one of 5 polls conducted here in New Hampshire over the last week on the Democratic nomination. Average them all together, Bernie Sanders is 49, Hillary Clinton at 43, O'Malley at 3. So it's still Bernie with a lead, a smaller lead, of course, but hey, with 4 weeks to go until primary day, it's a real race here. And as you said, too, it's a real race in Iowa. Remember, Iowa was where Hillary Clinton had the big lead. Then things got closer, and today a Quinnipiac University poll actually put him up by 4 or 5 points. The average them all together in Iowa, all the most recent surveys on the Democratic side, is basically dead even in Iowa. That's a shocker, too, right, Jeff?
No doubt. I mean, we talked to Kathy Abranovich yesterday from the Des Moines Register, and she's seeing, a lot of movement for Bernie, and she's also seeing a decline for Hillary Clinton, whether the Donald Trump looking at Bill Clinton's past issues, if you might. Maybe that is adding to it, not sure. But there's obviously some movement, and it's unfortunately for Hillary going down, and for Bernie, at least in New Hampshire, going up and maybe staying in contention in Iowa. That, to me, is the interesting part.
Yeah, very true, very true. And you're seeing a more aggressive Hillary Clinton in the last week going after Bernie Sanders, something she never used to do. Really, she never basically mentioned him by name. She's mentioning him by name now, and she's being very clear to make the contrast between her and him over some important issues to Democratic primary voters. So you're seeing that. You're seeing some top surrogates. Bill Clinton, I'll be covering him tomorrow. He was here last week. He's coming back again tomorrow, 3 stops. We had Hillary Clinton's daughter, Chelsea Clinton, campaigning solo for the first time for her mother today. A bunch of stops all across the state here in New Hampshire. So, yeah, I mean, they're taking the Hillary Clinton campaign realizes they got a real fight, at least here in the early primaries, early voting states. That may not be the case elsewhere in the country, but hey, we're the states that vote first, and if Bernie keeps the closer, wins these early contests, momentum matters, buddy.
Momentum matters. I think it's a game changer if he wins both, because now all of a sudden the pressure is, oh, here we go again, just like 2008, the insurgent, the guy that didn't have the name ID. Of course, Hillary goes into this always with the biggest name ID of anybody on both sides of the aisle. And that, to me, is another part of looking at these national polls and not looking at the 2 polls in which you actually have in races. Paul Steinhausen, thank you for checking in, my friend. We will talk to you next week. And this is going to be a wild and willy go-around until February 9th. Thank you, sir.
It's always great to talk to you. Take care, Jeff.
Thank you, Paul. We're right back with our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield. It's the Jeff Santos Show.